Hey, welcome back to Vox Terra, and if you have not done so, please do subscribe and click that notification bell. Today we're going to talk about what's called the U.S.-Mexican border crisis and unaccompanied minors, and it's been getting a lot of news attention lately. And I want to help people put it in perspective and learn to tone down the rhetoric and tone down some of the emotion, especially if they're on the side of we really got to crack down. So if you are on that side, I really urge you to listen through all the way. You might find some stuff interesting. And if you're not on that side, you're going to find some good, useful talking points in here. So because I want to appeal to all people, whether they consider themselves left or right or whatever, I often go towards religious citation, and that might interest people who are, religiously inclined, or people who are even just religious studies majors. So if we look at the Bible, the Torah, the Talmud, and even the Koran, we're going to see lines about welcoming the stranger. Now in the Bible in particular, in the Gospels, there's a line in there, or a verse, look at the mote in thine own eye before you look at the speck in your neighbor's eye. There's also a do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and blessed are the meek. So it's these religious commands why so many religious organizations are involved in refugee resettlement. So if you think back to when that shooter went into that synagogue and murdered all those people, well, the reason why that synagogue is involved in refugee resettlement, I believe, isn't because of the conspiracies that shooter believed, but because that's what the religion tells them to do. Welcome the strangers. As I was a stranger in your land, you took me in. There's a verse like that. Now, regarding the look at the mote in thine own eye, well, that's really brings me to the issue that I think it's buy-in from people who maybe have no stake or no interest in immigration. They don't have any relatives who are immigrants or that kind of thing. Because here I'm going to show you what our media is overlooking or underreporting about our involvement in these areas and the history, our involvement around the globe, really, and our history in really, in a sense, fomenting some of this chaos. By overlooking that, it creates the impression for people that the rest of the world is crazy, but we're sane here, and then it puts us in a position of well, how much charity can we do versus, we can only do so much. The situation's a lot different than that. Now, also, it comes to one of my arguments that, this really heavy focus on immigration over the past really couple of decades now is a tool used to distract people from a lot of the change and troubles going on at home. Or change that should be going on at home and the troubles we're having. And it's done to protect my general thesis, established business interests. Now let's start at a lot of what's under our noses, but maybe not really emphasized that way. Let's consider the history of our country if you're an American. Well, we all know that basically, a lot of the country was once Spanish territory. Texas, Nevada, Arizona, California. I can say them anglicized, but it's kind of fun to say California, New Mexico. Okay, it's just more fun to use the Spanish accent. So we know that was basically Spanish, and then they lost it. So in a sense, you can think of, this is Spanish territory, and people want to come back there, or it was. Now, also, that was all Indian or Native American territory, as all the country was. Now, let's think about what we all know, the basic, ethnic composition of people living in Mexico and Central America. Well, you can tell that's really heavily an amount of indigenous blood there, a lot of indigenous ethnicity mixed with some Spanish and others. So in a sense, if we think about all that native ethnicity, all that native blood in Central America and Mexico, because those indigenous populations weren't genocided to a very small amount of the population. The Spanish tended to maybe marry in there somewhat. You could even think of this heavy concern about Mexicans coming over and Central Americans. You could even think of it in a sense as a continuation of the Indian Wars. Now, I'm not saying that means we should open the borders. What I am saying is you put it in perspective. Now, that's our history that's not emphasized that way. There's also other aspects, our involvement around the globe and our involvement in Latin America, also underemphasized and not really put under our noses. Some of it's barely reported, and some of you got to do a lot of looking in the back pages of newspapers. But I'm not some, conspiracy person here. I'm not looking for I'm not going to sources that are way out of the mainstream. I'm going to mainstream sources, but I look for the underreported stories. So let's start with Honduras In the 1950s, we supported a coup there, which a lot of historians believed was to protect the United Fruit Company from having their land taken away, but under legal process by their president, Arbenz. Arbenz was going to pay United Fruit Company and some of the what was called the landed aristocracy of Honduras, the people who lived there and were very wealthy and owned a lot of the land. You had a lot of peasants who didn't have much land, and others who really owned all the land, and this really unequal distribution. The United Fruit Company, according to this historical review, wasn't happy with the rate of compensation they were going to get for their land from the Honduran government. As probably many of the wealthy elites, so-called elites, for lack of a better word, in Honduras were also unhappy. So you've got, this never really ended. It's just not really talked about. These connections between what I call the reckless elements of our business community and the reckless elements of the business community throughout the planet, and then how the militaries and that get involved in it. If that was emphasized, again, we would probably tone down some of the rhetoric. You can think about El Salvador. If you can remember back to the 1980s, you might remember our government. We were supporting the El Salvadoran government, who had a reputation for being very brutal. The justification, we were always told, as we were in the case of Honduras, is it's anti-communism. We're fighting communism. But within that fighting communism, a lot of people who might have been just general human rights advocates, labor leaders, etc., were also getting murdered. And even when we say anti-communism, to what really degree are we talking about something principled versus just trying to protect the interests of certain elements of the business community in those countries and within our own? That's never really been clear. When I was younger in the 80s, I would have completely bought into the anti-communist thing. So if you yourself are really rabid in that issue, hey, look, I was there with you too. I just don't see it quite that way any longer. I see this as a mix of some principle, but a lot of really just moneyed interests going on. And in El Salvador, we supported a very bloody government, and we won. We defeated those communists. And now look at El Salvador today. El Salvador, so-called communists and others. El Salvador today is now laden with criminal activity, as is a lot of the region where we won. Now, you could take, again, we in quotes here, I get it, you might not think that's what you're signing up for, but that's how things played out. Look at other parts of the world. Look at Libya. We supported an insurrection in Libya, and look at Libya today. We supported insurrection in Syria. Look at Syria today. We toppled the government in Iraq. Look at Iraq today. So the media it's right there. It's under your noses. It's under our noses, but it's just not being spelled out that way for us. If it was, I believe the rhetoric again would tone down, and that's really all I'm calling for. Now, back to Central America, it's been getting hit with what I believe and most scientists believe are climate change-driven disasters, like the hurricanes. In some of my earlier videos about hurricanes, I've cited you from the Natural Resource Defense Council and other sources explaining how hurricanes are driven, stronger hurricanes, and more damaging winds and damaging heavier rains are driven by the heating planet, including higher storm surges. How the hotter ocean temperatures and the hotter air temperatures are driving these extreme conditions. The hurricanes, the floods, and the droughts. Well, if you're a small, tiny country like Honduras or El Salvador, and you're getting hit with these kind of weather conditions, it's much more difficult for you to deal with it. In the United States, we look at Texas, Louisiana, when they're getting hit with that. Well, there's other states that can help them out. But these countries are pretty isolated, pretty on their own. And again, what's the role of the fossil fuel industry in driving this climate crisis? So if we are thinking in these terms of these business interests, these military interests, and the fossil fuel industry, that kind of thing, well, now maybe we're thinking of ourselves almost like, are we like an empire? We as in the United States, are we like an empire? Well, if we are, let's look at the British Empire. The British had a Commonwealth, and they take in people from different parts of the Commonwealth. That's why London is very diverse. Ancient Rome had asylum law. Really fascinating. There was asylum law going back to ancient Rome to protect people who were fleeing enemies, to give shelter and protection within the Roman Empire. So now it's my belief, going back to that welcome the stranger concept, there's a duty if you have an empire. Which is why it's not highlighted to us that way, because a lot of people don't want us to live up to that duty. Now, again, I put primarily forth, though, this heavy focus on immigration is like a distraction. I remember getting an email, a distraction and a diversion from change at home. I remember getting an email, a couple decades ago or sometime back, as this whole, concern about illegal immigration was really becoming front burner. And it was warning how, these illegal immigrants are burdening our system. That's why Medicaid, I believe, is going bankrupt. Well, that to me, I think that's a distraction, a diversion technique. Because if you look at things like Social Security, all you have to do is just raise the cap on who gets taxed for them, and there'd be plenty of money in there. Now, in the case of the Trump administration, Trump was really opening up America to oil and gas drilling offshore, et cetera, et cetera. But if you could really get people to focus on the threat from immigration or illegal immigration, now you got something to rally people around, or they're not going to notice how Trump is a front for these reckless elements of the business community that are pumping our earth full of carcinogens and greenhouse gases. Now back to welcome the stranger. Well, look, a lot of Americans, and many Americans don't realize this, are living overseas. Not all of them have good and valid visas. How do we want them treated? I remember back in the 90s when the Soviet Union first collapsed, I knew a lot of young Americans who went to live in Eastern Europe and get jobs, and I don't really know their visa status. Now, you can also think about Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was famous for initially going to Italy and acting in what were called spaghetti westerns. Then he came back to the United States. But the point is, Americans are living all over the planet as well. Now, these media outlets that really want to promote focusing on illegal immigration or immigration and that kind of thing, nobody wants to think of themselves as bad people, so they're going to also emphasize the humanitarian aspect like trafficking. Well, there are organizations that are sincerely concerned about trafficking, as we all should be, but I don't think they're providing links to those organizations. Now, with human trafficking, we've also got the criminal gangs coming in. Well, remember, like I told you initially with El Salvador, those criminal gangs are somewhat fruits of our victory. Unintended fruits of our victory. But also, though, the criminal gang, concern was also used against Irish immigration. You can think about Irish mafia. Well, the way that was dealt with was through robust law enforcement. Now, the other arguments, less grandiose, are their burden to our economy. Well, a lot of economists actually claim immigration, be it legal or illegal, really gets the economy going. For example, if you've ever been through any urban areas, you might have noticed how it's refugees and immigrants who have really rekindled life and businesses in some of those communities. And that includes data, when you're weighing out the initial social services some of those newcomers might get. Now, people are concerned about culture. Well, look, if you grew up in an area, maybe was heavy Polish or Italian or whatever, you might have noticed a lot of the people from your grandparents' generation, they really didn't speak English, but their kids all did. And that's what I find the same with any newcomers and immigrants today. Now, there's other dangers to immigration which are put out there. Like when I watched the 2016 Republican convention, they had a mother on there. I feel really terrible for her. Her child, died in a car crash with somebody who was an illegal immigrant. But there's other reasons for car crashes besides one's immigration status, which the Republican Party in that convention is completely ignoring. I heard another mother, and this mother should have got a lot of attention, but she didn't. She was on NPR, and that's about all I heard from her. And she had an organization, and I mentioned this in my Texas car crash disaster video, if you want to go back and watch that one. She was heading up an organization to get these crash bars installed on trucks, big tractor trailer trucks along the sides of them, which could easily be put on there, but aren't because of probably industry pressure. They don't want to pay for them. Well, this mother's daughter, her vehicle slid under one of those trucks, and her head was smashed in. But yet that's not talked about. See, the media really doesn't talk about how these established business interests are causing us a lot of harm, be it climate change, be it these crash bars on trucks. Instead, I think, really heavy focus on immigration is like a distraction technique. So I hope you found these talking points useful, interesting, helpful. If you agree with all of them or some of them, it doesn't matter. Let's just stay focused on the long-term survival of our species and find the common ground we can find. I hope you found this video super interesting. Please remember to click that subscribe button and that notification bell, comment, like, and until next time, peace be with you.